Hi everyone, this is my pool plan video for DFFOO global version of the game, and this video will be specifically focusing on the events and banners where Laguna will be the featured character. You can also see the events based on the cropped infographic on the left hand side of the slide, which was derived from Jakematt's global forecast. In particular, this will be covering Dimensions End Transcendence Tier 8, Irvine's Intersecting Wheel, and the Tiamat raid event featuring Thancred's LD. Just a quick disclaimer before starting the pool plan video. The plans that I make is very geared towards my playstyle and preference, as well as the current roster that I have in the game. Of course, everyone's playstyle and preference is always going to be a little bit different from person to person, and so the plans that I have may not be the best plan for you, and because of that I always recommend everyone to do your own research as well, so that you can make the best informed decision as to whether or not to pull or skip certain units. As always, what I'll try to focus on is my thought process as to the reason why I pull or skip certain units. Because what I think is more important is the reason behind the decision rather than the decision itself when it comes to these sort of videos. Before starting, just a quick recap about how I did during Zack's LDBT arc. Now there were quite a lot of banners here, but as you can see I actually skipped most of them. So the first banner and event that came up was the banner featuring Zack LDBT and Ridia's LD. I did pull here because I was also hoping to get Zack's burst weapon along the way, but Ridia's LD I think it was a pretty good price as well. So I went in with tickets and it took me 140 tickets until I scored Ridia's LD, but unfortunately I did not score Zack's burst weapon on that banner. I skipped Ramza's banner because I already had all his gear, so upon the release of that event I immediately greened Ramza. During that time also we had Vayne burst weapon as well as Ida's LD. That was an easy skip for me as well because I already had all the weapons on that banner. Next up we had Sid Rain's Lost Chapters featuring newly released Steiner's LD. That banner was a skip for me because I already had all of Sid Rain's weapon, and I wasn't really interested in Steiner's gear at all because he seems to me as sort of like a jack of all trades but master of none sort of character. And for me, I really like characters who actually specialize in something, they provide utility that not many other characters can provide. Though to me those are the characters that I generally try to aim for, and Steiner definitely isn't one of those. Next up we had the debut of Anna Crow from World of Final Fantasy, and I really like Anna Crow as a character, so I went in with tickets for her, and I had to spend 160 tickets before I score her LD, but I did get lucky and score Zack's burst weapon along the way, so that was a win. I didn't actually manage to pull her EX weapon, but that was okay because I had spare EX tokens anyway, so just her LD was enough and I was pretty happy scoring Zack's burst weapon. Now at the time of making of this video, there should still be 2 more banners left on Zack's LDBT arc. The first should be Charlotta's LD and Selfie's LD, and the second isn't confirmed or announced in global, but if you follow the JP trend, the second banner should be Garland's LDBT and Oren's LD. The banner featuring Garland and Oren is an easy skip for me because I have every weapon on that banner, including Garland's burst weapon. And the Charlotta and Selfie banner, if nothing changed, I will be skipping that banner as well because I already have Selfie's LD, which I actually think is the price of that banner, and I don't really have a lot of interest in Charlotta at this point of the game. She does have interesting mechanics in terms of being able to ignore defense due to how her damage is calculated, but I don't really see a big need for it at this moment in time. All in all, I only spent 300 tickets in Zack's LDBT arc, which I think is fantastic results, and it actually allowed me to remain at ticket cap coming into Laguna's LDBT arc. Alright, so coming to Laguna's LDBT arc, the first event will be Dimensions End Transcendence Tier 8, and there will be 2 events on that banner. The first event featuring Laguna's LDBT and a rerun of Lena LD, and the second banner featuring Terra and her rework with a rerun of her LDBT and a rerun of Shadow's LD. These 4 characters will also be receiving their C90 upgrade, which provides a boost to their EX as well as their C65 abilities. So first up about Laguna. Laguna receives a rework on his S1 and S2, which sort of bumps up his damage more to the current meta. His LD also provides a new buff and debuff, where the debuff will reduce the attack and defense of the enemies and increase HP damage taken, and the amount it changes depends on the number of debuffs on the enemies. His LD buff provides a nice full up attack every time Laguna does any form of attack that ends with HP damage, and this helps to further boost the damage that he can do. That, along with his role as a debuffer, really makes him, I think, as a solid character in the current meta. Of course, he also gets his BT, and his BT aura is pretty unique, I must say, in the sense that it lands a gold framed debuff on all enemies, and what it does is anytime after any turn, the gold frame debuff will tick sort of like a trap and deals HP damage that is corresponding to Laguna's attack stat. Because the gold frame debuff will trigger after every turn, this means that it will also trigger every turn during any other character's BT mode, which significantly increases the damage that any character can do during their burst mode. On top of that, of course, he has the very cool Man with the Machine Gun theme song during his BT mode, and that is actually one of my favorite songs of all time in Final Fantasy. Next up, we have Terra. Now, Terra's changes are more straightforward in the sense that her S1 and S2 receives rework that increases the number of HP dumps they have and bumps up her damage more to the current meta. Her LD also receives the same increase in HP dumps, and of course her C level 90 provides a much needed upgrade to her EX in terms of damage. I actually think Terra is a solid DPS character, given that the way she does damage is pretty unique because she gets a lot of free turns that comes from her LD. Essentially, every LD used gives her sort of like a mini burst phase of her own, and this allows her to rack up a lot of damage without increasing the turn count. I've actually used her even up to as recent as Anacro event as well, where I did a 0 turn run with Terra. There's not much else to be said about Shadow and Lena. They are pretty decent characters. Lena has her debuff immunity, Shadow as an evasion DPS sort of character that gets free turns whenever he evades an attack. Overall, my plans here will be to go in tickets on Laguna's LDBT banner until I score Laguna's LD. I was initially aiming to use gems, but because I'm at ticket cap, I actually have to use my tickets, otherwise I wouldn't be able to redeem any tickets from the co-op shop. So tickets it is, and I really hope to score Laguna's burst weapon along the way, but if I don't get it, I will probably stop once I score his LD. Regarding Terra banner, it is pretty straightforward for me because I have every weapon on that banner already, and I actually have Terra blue. My plan is to actually green both Laguna and Terra because I really like both of their playstyles as well. Next up, we have Irvine's Intersecting Wheels, featuring the release of Irvine's LD. His newly released LD provides him access to an instant turn ability that isn't really an attack. When you use his LD, it changes his Brave and HP attack abilities into Dark Ammo and Pulse Ammo accordingly. Sort of like it gives him new ammo that gives him access to new attacks. Both the attacks are actually pretty interesting. I think in particular Dark Ammo, because Dark Ammo inflicts a new debuff that provides a combination of 20% defense down, 20% HP damage up, poison, and the standard 50% blind, all in one frame debuff. Pulse Ammo, on the other hand, is more oriented towards damage. It doesn't inflict any debuffs, but it's a very hard hitting single target attack with also 50% HP damage splash. I think what's interesting about Irvine at least is that his LD call ability actually provides access to his Dark Shot debuff, which is the defense down, HP damage up, poison and blind all into one. There's actually not many call abilities that provides blind, so that could actually come in handy, although it is only 50%, so it is a bit RNG based. He still has his range resist down debuff, and his call ability also inflicts range resist down on top of the Dark Shot debuff. So all in all, I think he's got pretty decent utility, and if you actually missed Friend and her debuff, then Irvine is another solid character if you're interested in having range resist down in your roster. Overall, my plan here is to actually skip Irvine, and the reason behind this I think is I already have Friend and her LD call ability, so I'm not in a lot of need for a range resist down debuff, and there's not many fights that actually require it in the first place, because if the enemies are resistant to attacks, you usually just get around that by using Elemental Imperil and Enchant, and many characters including Garnet herself provides that utility already. On top of that, the secondary LD on this banner is SAS LD, and I already have that weapon, so that's even less of a reason for me to actually pull on this banner. If you are fairly new to the game though, and you've missed out key support characters such as Ramza or Garnet, I actually think this is a somewhat decent banner because you get two characters with utility that you can fit into your roster. The first with SAS as an offensive support, and the second with Irvine and his range resist down. The third event on this arc will be Tiamat's raid event, and on this event we have a banner featuring the release of Thancred's LD and a much needed rework for Thancred, as well as a rerun of Maria's LD. First off, about Maria, she does also receive a rework on her skill 1 and skill 2 and her LD, and of course her C90 upgrades her EX. Coming to Thancred, while he does receive a rework to his S1 and S2, it seems pretty lackluster, at least based on the Japanese version of the game, because his S1 and S2 only has 2 HP dumps in total. His LD does have an interesting gimmick in the sense that it provides him a stacking debuff that can go up to 5 stacks. Anytime Thancred X, it increases the stack by 1 automatically, or you can use his LD to give him instant 5 stacks. Anytime this buff hits 5 stacks, his HP attack ability changes to a new ability called Trick Attack. Trick Attack is fairly hard hitting, it is instant and it doesn't increase the turn count, so that will boost his DPS considerably. But the thing that I don't really like about his kit is that Trick Attack is only accessible once his buff reaches 5 stacks, and while you can get instant 5 stacks on LD use, once his LD is gone, this means that you can only get access to Trick Attack once every 5 turns that Thancred has, which to me really seems quite lackluster overall. His Trick Attack does inflict also a new debuff called Trick Attack for 4 turns, but the only thing it does is increase the HP damage the enemy takes by 20%, which at this point of the meta, virtually almost every other character has this built in already, so it's really nothing special about Thancred. And as a DPS character, it seems to me, I don't play JP version of the game, but it seems to me that he doesn't really do a lot of damage in the first place. So overall, this banner is an easy skip for me. I do already have all of Maria's gear anyway, so I'm not really missing much by skipping Thancred here, and even if I did pull for him, I'll likely use one of the many other DPS characters that we recently received. Alright, on this part of the video, I'll be covering my opinion, and I can't stress that enough, it's really an opinion on which characters I think is a bit more deserving of your gems, tickets or ingots if you have limited resources at hand. Before going any further on this slide, I do want to say that if you have low resources and you are fairly new to the game, my recommendation is to actually go for Ramza and Zack banner, which is still live at the time of making of this video. Their banners will be around until April 12th, and both of them together is considerably powerful and will likely last you all the way until Shinryu era. The way I sort of view things is that I sort of place characters broadly across 3 categories. The first is what I sort of call as good value, in the sense where I think characters here would provide a lot of return of investment regardless of who else you already have in your roster. And generally I think it's a good idea to have these characters because you can reuse them over many different stages in the game. In this arc, there's only one character that I placed in this category, and that's Laguna. I feel Laguna has a lot going for him because there's not many BT characters that specializes in debuffs, and the fact that his BT finisher lands a gold frame debuff that provides off-turn damage, I think is really special. And while there are some other characters who of course provides off-turn damage, because this works as a gold frame debuff, it works even if you swap Laguna out, and his damage from the gold frame debuff isn't reduced when he leaves the field because it's based on his attack stat on the turn that he inflicts that debuff. So this actually allows you, for example, to land his gold frame debuff, swap him up for say a Garnet or Ramza support, and then go into one big meaty burst mode with one of your other DPS characters. Next up is what I call as role fulfillment categories. The characters that I place here has value, I think, depending on what other characters that you actually have at the moment in your roster, because while they do provide some value and some utility, there are also potentially other characters that can provide same value and utility, and if you have those other characters, then there could be a case to actually skip these characters. I placed 3 characters on this arc in this category, which is Terra, Irvine and Lena. Terra, I actually really like her, and I did say that I will green her because she is a personal favorite of mine, and she actually fits my playstyle very nicely as sort of like a burst, kill the boss as quickly as possible sort of character. Her biggest value is that she can do damage without really increasing the turn count, and due to the way her LD works, she's a character that can get many consecutive free turns. And if you pair her with an off-turn damage dealer, say for example Laguna with his gold frame debuff, or Noctis with his BT full up attack, or Cloud of Darkness with her BT full up attack, Terra can actually do quite a hefty amount of damage in very few turn counts. That being said, if you're not too fast about turn count, and if you are very comfortable with the amount of DPS characters you have in your roster, then you don't really even need to use Terra. You can just use one of the other DPS characters and you should be fine all the way until Shinryu era. Next up is Irvine. Irvine I sort of view as a utility character because he can actually inflict range imperil to all enemies, and his LD actually provides him a new frame debuff that has a lot going for him, and of course on top of that he also can actually heal as well. Thinking about it, his utility isn't very unique in a sense because there are characters who can pretty much do everything that he can, and while his LD call ability is interesting because it can inflict his dark shot debuff, if you do a lot of no boss turn runs, half of the component of his dark shot debuff, which is the blind and the poison component, doesn't really give you a lot of value because the boss isn't doing any attacks. Next up is Lena. Lena I put in this category because she is one of the few characters in the game who can provide debuff immunity, and that in itself I actually place a lot of value because there are some fights in the game where the debuffs can be particularly crippling to your team, and being outright immune to debuffs can actually save your run in quite a few cases. There are of course a few other characters that can provide debuff immunity, so if you already have that going for you, I feel that there's not a lot of need to pull for Lena. She can also heal your party as well, and her LD gives her access to Dragon Breath, which is sort of an attack that's based on your party's HP, and that sort of bypasses the enemy's defenses as well. But beyond that, we did have access to stellar supports in the game, such as Ramza and Garnet, so there's actually even less need of Lena, which is why I put her in the role fulfillment category. Next up is what I call as consolation prizes. Now, as the name implies, the characters in this category aren't necessarily bad. In fact, all of them can even be used in endgame content, but the reason why they are in this category, I feel, is that their utility and value is often overshadowed by many other characters in the game. There are 4 characters that I place here, and the first is Sas, and Sas to me I think is somewhat in between categories 2 and 3 here, but ultimately just on the basis that we have strong supports in terms of Garnet and Ramza, I don't really see a lot of need for Sas at the moment. He specializes in offensive support, and what's I guess somewhat unique about him is that he can also provide a 100% crit rate up to the party. The thing that I don't really like about Sas is a number of his debuffs are generic in nature, which is unframed, and this means that he does have a tendency to have his buffs pushed off by other buffs or debuffs. The other reason why I sort of edge him more towards the consolation prize category is that at this current point of the game in the global meta, most of the friend supports set by players are either Ramza or Garnet. In fact, 90% I think of my friend list is either usually Ramza or Garnet, and if you just swap one of your party members out for either one of those supports, you should be fine in terms of support auras to the party, so there's really not a lot going for pulling for Sas at the current meta. Shadow is actually one of my favorite characters. I actually did pull his LD by luck on one of the earlier banners, and I did actually use him in some endgame content, and he actually exceeded my expectations. The fact that he can actually have up to 100% evasion if you use his additional ability is pretty interesting, and you can actually rack up quite a lot of consecutive free turns for him because he gets that anytime he evades an attack, which is also something sort of unique to his kit. That being said, he is somewhat of a selfish DPS character because he doesn't actually provide other utility to the party beyond the fact that he can evade attacks by himself, and he brings defense ignoring DPS. And at this point, we have been given many recent characters at the DPS category, which is the main reason why I park him on this category. If I really want to build more DPS characters, my first go-to will actually be Terra over him anyway, and since Terra's in the same arc, there's even less of a need for Shadow. Next up, we have Maria, and Maria I think was actually pretty solid when her LD first debuted, because her LD lands a debuff that will gravity shave a boss down to 0 and follow up with a brave attack on the boss's turn, which means that the bosses are forced to start their turn in a broken state. To me though, currently I don't really see a lot of need because my playstyle is usually more of a kill boss before they get a turn, so there's not a lot of need for her LD debuff, and if you're not planning to use her LD debuff, there's not a lot of other reasons to bring Maria to the party anyway. However, that being said, if you are fairly new and you want someone to make your runs a little bit more safer and provide support and heals at the same time, then Maria is I guess pretty decent for that role. Next up is Thancred, and Thancred is I think a real no-brainer here. His LD, based on what I can read, seems to me like the worst LD debut ever in the GL version of the game. The devs could potentially change things up for Thancred, but if he does get released, the same way as his JP version got released, then I think he's a pretty easy skip. If you want a DPS character, you can even bring Terra or Shadow over him. Either of them would be miles better than bringing Thancred. So that's it for this video. In summary, my plan here is to really use secrets for Laguna's LD, and I will pray to RNGesus to hope that I also score Laguna's burst weapon along the way, because I will be skipping every other banner on this arc. At the end of it, if I still don't score Laguna's burst weapon, I may actually just use my BT tokens and token his burst weapon, because I really like Laguna and I love his theme song as well. Thank you for watching, and if you did like the video, please leave a like, comment or subscribe. It really helps a lot. Till then, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!